Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. In this juz, we are reading in Surah Hud, and at the end of the juz, it enters into Surah Yusuf. So I'll leave Surah Yusuf, Tarek can talk about that tomorrow. But Surah Hud, the companions, they came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they said, why have you become gray? Why do you have this gray hair? You're young. And he said, شَيَبَتْنِ هُودُ وَأَخَوَاتِهَا. He said, I have become gray haired because of Hud and its sisters. And in the other narrations of the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned some of the other chapters in the Quran. But in all of the versions of the hadith, he mentioned Surah Hud. So the question then is, what in Surah Hud makes the Prophet ﷺ become gray haired? I mean, physically he becomes gray haired. You know, when you have a big event in your life, or extra responsibility, or something calamitous or something like that, people, they become gray haired. Like you see the President Obama, when he first became president, his hair was all black. You know, and then like 6 months into his presidency, all of his hair is gray because of all of this extra. It's physical, it happens, right? So this happened to the Prophet ﷺ. And why did you become so gray haired? He said, because of this chapter, Hud. This chapter, it talks about several stories of the prophets. They talk about Nuh alayhi salam in some detail, and then in the middle a little bit about Hud, and then Shu'aib, Salih, and then some of the other stories. So I don't want to get into the details of the stories, but what I want to say is that all of these stories, Allah Ta'ala has chosen to give them to us in various levels of detail. And these stories for us are archetypes. They describe the motion of humanity in different modes of responsibility, different modes in their responses to revelation, in their responsibility towards humanity. And all of these stories, we benefit from them. These are the best of stories. In the beginning of Surah Yusuf, Allah Ta'ala says these are the best of stories. So these stories, they make us pay attention. There are other stories throughout history, but these stories in particular, Allah Ta'ala has given us because we benefit from them. And one of the principles that we have in the Quran is in Quran, يُؤْخَذْ كُلُّهُ لِكُلِّهِ, that the Quran, we take all of it for it. Every verse you take out, and it's an umbrella of meaning. So for example, in the verse of Salih, وَهُوَ أَنْشَأَكُم مِّنَ الْأَرْضِ وَاسْتَعْمَرَكُم فِيهَا. Allah addresses the people of Salih. He says, Allah has created you from earth, and He has caused you to dwell in the earth. But this is for us too. This is one of the purposes of creation, that He has created us in this world to develop this world. So just because Allah addresses the people of Salih, or the people of Hud, or the people of Nuh, it's also for us as well. So the question remains, what makes the Prophet ﷺ gray-haired? From chapter of Hud. In this chapter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He describes the people of Hud, the people of Salih, the people of Noah, and then later the people of Yusuf. And He talks about how they were given this revelation, and they failed in carrying this revelation, and they became away, بُعْدًا لِصَالِحٍ بُعْدًا لِثَمُودٍ. They became away from Allah Ta'ala's grace. And Imam al-Ghazali, he says that this awayness from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused the Prophet ﷺ to be so concerned that he turned gray contemplating on this. Because all of the messengers, they came to call people to sanity, to call people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to call people to Allah's mercy, to Allah's beauty. We talked a few nights ago about the different names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when they failed to carry this, they became outside of Allah's mercy. Even Noah, alayhi salam, his own son didn't believe. Imagine your own flesh and blood not believing. How concerned Sayyidina Nuh was, alayhi salam. And he said, but Allah, he is from my family. And you said that my family will be safe. And then Allah says, He is not from your family. إِنَّهُ عَمَلٌ غَيْرَ صَالِحٍ. He didn't say, إِنَّ أَعْمَالَهُ غَيْرُ صَالِحٍ. He himself, he is action that is not good. Not that he committed actions that are not good. I mean, the Arabic is so rich that the son of Nuh ﷺ himself, he was a not righteous action. So Nuh says, okay, I'm not for me to interfere, but imagine the weight of this, that your own flesh and blood not believe. And the Anbiya, all of them, they see their community as their own children. And this is the concern that they have of them. The Prophet ﷺ, he wept for his community. And he wept for us, the people that came after him, that did not see him but believe in him. So when he reads these verses, he takes this seriously. He says, I don't want my community to be like this, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need us. If we don't fall in line, Allah ta'ala will replace us with somebody else. And the Prophet ﷺ saw this as a great calamity. He didn't want this to happen to his community. And we have to remember this in the transaction between us and Allah. We need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if we don't fall in line, if we don't comply, if we don't carry this trust, Allah ta'ala will give it to somebody else, another Muslim community, and we will be gone with the wind. And because of this, he became gray-haired. So when we read these stories, later, other nights, maybe we'll get into the details of some of the stories of the Anbiya. But when we read these stories, you should reflect on the archetype nature of these stories. That these stories speak to all modes of our life. How we deal with calamity, how we become the underdog, how we believe when it's not in vogue. Because sometimes belief and our religious teachings are not what's in vogue with the dominant culture. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with holding on to our faith despite what is going on around us? All of these stories show us how we can do that, and also show us what will happen if we don't do that, to us and to our children and our children's children. So these stories are for us to reflect on, to guide us, and we remember that the Quran, all of it we benefit from. Even if one verse we take out of context, as it were, it's still a verse of the Quran. The Quran يُؤْخَذْ كُلُّهُ لِكُلِّهِ, all of it is taken for itself because it is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam.